When the empath wakes up, the truth they see changes everything. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. Welcome to Spiritual Wisdom, where today we explore what truly happens when the empath wakes up. This isn't just a personality shift, it's a spiritual revelation. When the empath finally stops pleasing everyone and begins to see through the masks, the truth they uncover changes everything about relationships, identity, even the soul's purpose. These insights aren't just theories. They're practical truths you can apply to your daily life for healing, clarity, and empowerment. So let me ask you, have you ever felt like you were sensing more than others, but didn't know why? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story could awaken someone else. And if this resonates with you, don't forget to like and subscribe to keep walking this path of truth with us. 1. People-pleasing is a trauma response, not a personality trait. People-pleasing is not a noble character trait. It is a wound dressed as virtue. For the empath, this instinct to soothe, to accommodate, to disappear into the needs of others was never about kindness. It was about survival. It began in rooms filled with tension, where speaking your truth could cost you affection, safety, or peace. So instead, you learned to become what others needed: hyper-aware, emotionally available, endlessly forgiving. But what looked like grace was actually self-abandonment. You bent until you broke, and still they asked for more. This wasn't love. It was quiet servitude. Your sensitivity wasn't divine. It was your soul's shield, forged in chaos, sharpened by the fear of being too much or not enough. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And for years, this fate felt like yours. To serve, to heal, to carry, to bleed without acknowledgement. But something begins to shift when the empath awakens. He stops calling his exhaustion compassion. He begins to feel the ache of his own silence. He notices how often he laughed at things that hurt, apologized for things he didn't do, and said yes when every part of his soul was screaming no. He begins to see that the comfort of others has come at the cost of his own authenticity. And suddenly, the role of emotional caretaker becomes unbearable. The persona, carefully stitched together through years of coping, starts to unravel. This is not a breakdown. It is a remembering. The man beneath the mask begins to rise. Not the polished version trained to be agreeable, but the raw, sacred, untamed soul who knows his worth doesn't depend on who he pleases. And when he stops performing, the world starts to react. Some pull away. Some resent the new boundaries. Some no longer recognize him. But none of that matters because he finally recognizes himself. The awakening of the empath is not a gentle process. It's a spiritual rebellion against emotional slavery. He no longer seeks validation from those who only loved his silence. He no longer translates other people's discomfort as his failure. He no longer confuses peace with people's approval. Instead, he learns to sit in the discomfort of truth. He learns that empathy doesn't mean abandoning himself. It means feeling deeply without being consumed. It means caring without collapsing. It means offering love that includes himself. And so, he walks away from roles that demand his pain as payment. He speaks truth, even when his voice shakes. He becomes unavailable to manipulation, immune to guilt, and grounded in his soul's clarity. His presence no longer pleases, it awakens. And some will hate him for it. But those who are ready will feel seen. Because when the empath stops bowing, he rises. And when he rises, he doesn't just free himself, he becomes a mirror that shows others the chains they've been living in too. If you've realized that your people-pleasing habits stem from old emotional wounds, not your true self, then it's time to reclaim your power. Comment below. I choose to heal. If you're ready to stop surviving and start living as your authentic soul. 2. When the empath stops pleasing, their true self begins to awaken. When the empath finally stops pleasing others, something ancient begins to awaken a buried voice. Long silenced beneath the noise of obligation and performance, starts to rise. For so long, they have molded themselves around the emotional demands of others, erasing their own needs for the illusion of peace. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And for the empath, that journey begins the moment they stop sacrificing their truth for someone else's comfort. Beneath the surface of niceness, beneath the conditioned behaviors and false smiles, there lives a soul that remembers who it was before the world told it to be small. The empath was never born to be a caretaker of other people's projections. They were shaped into it, forged not out of light, but out of the necessity to survive in emotionally chaotic spaces. And when they no longer play the role they were assigned, the false identity begins to crack, revealing a deeper self that's been waiting not to be discovered, but to be reclaimed. You start to hear your own thoughts again. You realize how many times you said yes when everything inside you screamed no. You begin to notice the weight of other people's expectations that you've been carrying like bricks on your back. And what once felt like kindness now feels like self-betrayal. This is the moment Carl Jung called the shadow confrontation, when the parts of yourself you've disowned begin to surface, not to destroy you, but to integrate you. You may feel guilt at first. You may be labeled selfish or distant. People who once benefited from your silence will resist your truth. But discomfort is the door to authenticity. And it's in this discomfort that the empath begins to transform not into someone new, but into someone real. You stop apologizing for having boundaries. You stop shrinking when your soul wants to expand. You stop being responsible for everyone's happiness and start becoming accountable for your own peace. There was a woman named Elena who lived her entire life anticipating everyone's needs. At work, she was the first to volunteer. At home, she was the emotional sponge for her entire family. One day, after a panic attack in a grocery store parking lot, she realized she couldn't remember the last time she did something purely for herself. That night, she sat in silence and wrote one sentence in her journal. "I don't know who I am." That sentence wasn't a breakdown, it was a breakthrough. Over the next year, she slowly learned to say no. She let go of friendships that only survived on her emotional labor. She took long walks without explaining herself, and for the first time, she felt her soul, not in theory, but in practice. Carl Jung reminds us, who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. Elena had spent her whole life dreaming of belonging, but when she stopped pleasing, she awakened to something far more sacred belonging to herself. This is what happens when the empath wakes up. They stop dancing to the rhythm of someone else's story. They stop offering themselves as emotional currency. They start honoring their voice, their space, their energy. And in doing so, they stop being a mirror for others and start becoming a window into something deeper, truth, clarity, soul. The lesson is clear. Your sensitivity is not a curse. It's a compass. Your emotions are not liabilities. They are guides. And the real you, the one hidden under years of performance, is not too much. It is medicine for you and for the world. 3. The awakening begins with rage, not compassion. The spiritual awakening of an empath begins not with calm acceptance, but with holy rage, a fire so ancient it feels like your soul has waited lifetimes to finally erupt. This isn't the rage that destroys, it's the sacred flame that reveals. It's born from years, sometimes decades, of being manipulated, dismissed, and emotionally drained by people who mistook your kindness for consent. This anger is not a sign of your brokenness. It is the moment you remember who you are. Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And indeed, it is this pain, this emotional revolt, that severs the chains of codependency and sets you on the path of radical self-truth. You stop asking what's wrong with you and start questioning why you tolerated so much. And with that question, something spiritual shifts. You begin to see clearly. Every time you said yes when your soul meant no. Every time you gave your energy to someone who never intended to return it. Every time you shrank so someone else could shine. The empath doesn't just wake up. They rise, not in bitterness, but in brutal honesty. You start reclaiming your boundaries, not as barriers, but as sacred altars of self-respect. You stop seeking validation from those who feed off your guilt. You understand now that love without limits isn't compassion, it's self-erasure. And so, you draw the line not in cruelty, but in clarity. You no longer feel guilty for protecting your peace, for choosing silence over saving others, for saying no without explanation. You stop romanticizing one-sided loyalty, and you recognize that your emotional sensitivity is not a burden, it's a spiritual compass. You begin to notice how the world changes when you stop over-explaining yourself. You begin to speak less and feel more. You begin to pull away not in anger, but in knowing. You observe rather than absorb. You stop playing the healer in relationships built on your self-sacrifice. You see that those who love the old version of you, the compliant, self-sacrificing version, may no longer understand who you are becoming, and that's okay. You're not becoming cold, you're becoming clear. And the clearer you become, the more everything shifts. You stop chasing closure from people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop rescuing those who enjoy drowning. You stop softening your truth to avoid rejection. Because now, your soul has remembered. You were never here to be consumed. You were here to be conscious. And that consciousness, rooted in both spiritual fire and divine stillness, is what makes the awakened empath unstoppable. You're no longer living to be needed. You're living to be whole. If you're ready to reclaim your power and let your sacred fire guide you toward transformation, comment below. I honor my rage and rise. 4. Reclaiming the shadow is essential to becoming whole. Reclaiming the shadow is not a weakness. It's the highest act of courage a man can take to become whole. The empath, often seen as soft or overly sensitive, carries within him a deep well of power that has been hidden beneath years of self-denial and suppression. Anger, hunger, and selfishness are not sins to be exiled, but instincts to be understood and integrated. For too long, the empath has worn a mask of harmony, sacrificing truth for acceptance. But when he finally stops editing himself for the comfort of others, something ancient awakens. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The empath's fate begins to shift when he stops rejecting the parts of his soul he was taught to fear. That anger you buried, it was your boundary. That hunger you denied, it was your calling. That selfishness you repressed, it was your right to exist without apology. The shadow is not darkness to be eliminated, but depth to be explored. The empath's shadow contains everything he was punished for feeling: intensity, desire, instinct. But suppressing these parts only fragments the soul and leaves him disconnected from his masculine core. When the empath begins to integrate his shadow, he stops people-pleasing and starts truth-telling. He stops shrinking and starts standing. He doesn't do it to dominate, but to reclaim the parts of himself that hold spiritual gravity. He realizes that being spiritual does not mean being passive. It means having the presence to feel everything and the discernment to act with purpose. He stops fearing his own strength and begins using it to carve space for truth, for depth, for sacred boundaries. This is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world taught you to betray yourself. As the empath reclaims these lost pieces, his soul becomes magnetic, not because he is trying to be liked, but because he is finally real. He no longer confuses silence for peace or compliance for love. He speaks with clarity, not performance. He rests without guilt. He desires without shame. His presence becomes a mirror reflecting truth back into the spaces where only illusion used to live. And that is when the transformation becomes undeniable. The empath, who once bent for approval, becomes the man who walks in alignment, and in doing so, his energy shifts from being invisible to unforgettable. He doesn't reject softness. He protects it with fire. He doesn't lose his heart. He anchors it with soul. 5. True healing requires grief, solitude, and identity death. True healing, as Carl Jung deeply understood, is not a feel-good process. It is an unraveling, a descent, a painful rebirth. For the empath, this process begins with the death of the pleaser identity, that familiar mask worn for years to earn love, avoid conflict, and feel safe in a world that often demands conformity over truth. Letting go of that role feels like dying, not metaphorically, but soul deep. You grieve the illusions that held your identity together, the toxic relationships that mirrored your unworthiness, and the false love that once convinced you suffering was a necessary price for belonging. And in the ruins of what used to be, silence rises not as emptiness, but as a sacred space where your true self begins to stir. It is in this silence that the empath hears, often for the first time, their real voice. A voice that has been buried under years of emotional labor, self-abandonment, and the need to be everything for everyone but themselves. The solitude that once felt like exile becomes the fire in which the soul is tempered. Grief, once feared, becomes a holy language, a conversation with all the versions of yourself who were denied love unless they were pleasing, soft, or invisible. You begin to realize that your healing isn't in being fixed, but in being found. Take Ava, for instance, a woman who built her life around service, excellence, and being the emotional backbone for everyone she knew. She was praised for her resilience, admired for her selflessness, yet no one ever asked how she truly felt beneath the surface. When her marriage shattered and her health followed, Ava retreated from everything: her job, her friendships, even her identity. In the deafening stillness of her empty apartment, she didn't hear answers. She heard pain. She wept for the girl she had abandoned in order to be loved. She wrote letters to the woman she could have been had she not spent her life adapting, apologizing, overgiving. In those quiet nights of grief and awakening, Ava found a different kind of strength, the courage to stop performing. Months later, she re-emerged, not with a new identity, but with no mask at all. Ava's story isn't rare. It's the silent scream of every soul who has been trained to please at the cost of truth. And Carl Jung's teachings on the shadow remind us that what we suppress doesn't disappear, it grows roots. When the empath wakes up, they no longer feed the patterns that kept them small. They expose them, heal them, and step into the wholeness that was buried beneath. What this journey reveals is that grief is not just a process. It's proof that your soul is shedding its false attachments. Solitude is not loneliness. It is sacred space for becoming. And if it feels like everything is falling apart, it's often because your true self is finally rising from beneath the rubble of expectations and emotional survival. This is the paradox of healing. It looks like falling apart on the outside, but on the inside, it is the soul's revolution. The lesson is clear: if you're grieving, you're remembering. If you're alone, you're reconnecting. If you're exhausted, it's because your soul is finally saying no to the weight it was never meant to carry. And in this sacred undoing, you are not breaking. You are breaking free. If you're ready to release who you were to become who you truly are, like this video, subscribe for more soul-deep wisdom, and share in the comments, "I'm ready to grieve and rise. Let's walk this healing path together." 6. Boundaries are not selfish. They are sacred. Boundaries are not selfish. They are sacred. And for the spiritual empath, this truth is a turning point. It's the moment they stop betraying their soul just to keep others comfortable, when they no longer equate love with sacrifice or silence with virtue. They realize that saying no without guilt is not a rejection of others. It's a reclamation of the self. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And for the empath, that privilege begins with honoring their energy as something divine. No longer giving from depletion, they begin to give from fullness, from a place of inner alignment that no longer seeks validation through overextension. This shift in vibration doesn't require confrontation. It simply creates distance from manipulation. The more they step into spiritual sovereignty, the more those who feed on their guilt or people-pleasing tendencies simply fall away. This awakening is not loud or dramatic. It's quiet, clear, and deeply grounded. The empath no longer feels responsible for the emotional states of others. Instead of absorbing chaos, they begin to discern what is theirs to carry and what was never theirs to begin with. Boundaries stop being defense mechanisms and become sacred rituals, acts of clarity that define where their soul ends and someone else's begins. The empath becomes more than just intuitive. They become spiritually precise. They feel the room, but they no longer abandon themselves in the process. They sit with the discomfort of being misunderstood, knowing that truth doesn't always need translation. They begin to walk in a kind of spiritual authority that doesn't seek approval because it flows from inner truth. The transformation isn't about becoming hard, it's about becoming whole. There's no bitterness in this evolution, only clarity. No more saving people who refuse to save themselves. No more performing for love or shrinking for peace. The empath learns that their softness is not weakness, it is sacred power. And this power is no longer outsourced to guilt, obligation, or fear of being alone. Instead, it is anchored in spiritual wisdom, in a calm refusal to betray the soul's quiet knowing. Ram Dass once said, "If you think you're enlightened, spend a week with your family." And it's in those familiar dynamics that the empath now notices the old roles they refuse to play. The need to rescue, to mediate, to carry pain that isn't theirs, it's gone. What remains is presence, peace, and the unwavering decision to choose themselves without apology. And that choice doesn't make them selfish. It makes them free. 7. The empath evolves into a mystic and an oracle. They say a man becomes wise not through years, but through wounds, and the empath, once shaped by silent suffering and the weight of others' needs, begins to awaken into something far more powerful. A mystic, an oracle, a soul that no longer feels to perform, but feels to perceive. He no longer absorbs pain to earn affection or contorts himself to maintain peace. His empathy is no longer transactional. It becomes transcendent. The shift is radical, yet quiet, a spiritual unfolding where the soul steps out of servitude and into sovereignty. No longer driven by the hunger to be needed, he begins to see that his true value was never in how much pain he could carry for others, but in how clearly he could see through the veils of illusion that others couldn't bear to acknowledge. And that vision becomes his power, not because he sought it, but because he endured enough betrayal to recognize the mask behind the smile, the control behind the compliment, the fear beneath the anger. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The awakened empath no longer lives at the mercy of invisible agreements. He doesn't say yes to things that drain him, doesn't apologize for protecting his peace, and doesn't offer himself up as emotional currency for someone else's validation. His presence becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, people either confront their truth or retreat from it. He doesn't need to speak much. His energy says what words cannot, and that energy is no longer scattered across the needs of others. It is focused, anchored, sovereign. This kind of man, who has walked through the fire of emotional martyrdom and emerged without ashes, is not a healer because he tries to fix others. He heals because he no longer abandons himself. What used to be anxiety becomes intuition. What used to be guilt becomes discernment. What used to be people-pleasing becomes power. The empath once bent himself to be palatable. Now, he stands as a presence that cannot be digested by those who live in control and chaos. His softness is no longer permission for others to trespass. It is strength wrapped in stillness. His soul no longer negotiates with dysfunction. It recognizes the pattern and steps aside. He doesn't chase closure. He doesn't argue with distortion. He sees the game and chooses not to play. And in that refusal, he becomes free. The man who used to crave being chosen no longer needs to be seen to know he is worthy. He has looked in the mirror and remembered his own name. His soul has returned not as a whisper, but as a force. And now, his life is not built on emotional sacrifice, but on spiritual truth. He doesn't become harder. He becomes holier. He doesn't build walls. He walks in light. And those who cannot meet him there will fall away, not as punishment, but as a clearing. Because a soul this awake no longer negotiates its worth to make others comfortable. He simply exists, and that is enough. Do you feel the shift within you? If this message speaks to your soul, declare it in the comments. I am evolving into the mystic I was born to be. And if you're ready to walk this path of awakening, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with others on the journey. 8. The body mirrors the psychic transformation. When the empath finally stops betraying themselves to keep the peace or meet others' expectations, something extraordinary begins to happen beneath the surface. Their body, long ignored, begins to speak a different language. Carl Jung once said, "The body is the unconscious made visible." And nowhere is that more evident than in the life of an empath reclaiming their soul. Years of tension, anxiety, and mysterious fatigue that no doctor could explain begin to melt away. It's not because they found the perfect supplement or new age cure. It's because they stopped making themselves small to make others comfortable. They stopped absorbing the pain of everyone around them and finally said, "No more." With every boundary drawn, with every truth spoken aloud instead of swallowed, the body relaxes, the nervous system settles, and the chronic symptoms that once defined their identity start to disappear. It's as if their cells themselves are breathing a sigh of relief. Finally, we are safe to be. I knew a woman named Sarah, a high school counselor in her early 50s, who had spent over 2 decades caring for students, friends, family, everyone except herself. On the outside, she was kind, dependable, always smiling. On the inside, she carried a lifetime of silent aches, migraines, digestive problems, and a constant exhaustion she called normal. When her therapist introduced her to the works of Carl Jung and asked her one simple question, "What would it mean to choose you?" something cracked open. At first, she was afraid. She worried she'd become selfish or be abandoned. But slowly, she started saying no. She took walks alone. She stopped answering every late-night phone call. And within 6 months, the migraines disappeared. Her digestion improved. She began sleeping through the night for the first time in 10 years. It wasn't a miracle. It was an alignment. Her soul had come home to her body, and her body responded with gratitude. The empath's transformation is not just psychological, it is spiritual, biological, and energetic. As they stop leaking their life force into other people's stories, they reclaim that energy for themselves. What once went into emotional labor now fuels their creativity. What once fueled anxiety now gives rise to clarity. Carl Jung spoke of individuation as the sacred process of becoming whole, of uniting all parts of the self, even the hidden and wounded ones. For the empath, this means learning to trust that they are not broken. They were just stretched too thin by a world that never asked how they felt. When they begin to feel again, not for others, but for themselves, the body listens. Healing begins in the quiet. Health is no longer a goal. It is a natural consequence of spiritual congruence. So if your body has been crying out, if you've been living in cycles of burnout, illness, or emotional chaos, ask yourself gently but honestly, where have I abandoned myself? What truth have I swallowed to keep someone else comfortable? Because the truth is, your body is not your enemy. It is your ally, your mirror, your messenger. The moment you stop betraying your soul, your body will stop screaming. The moment you reclaim your energy, you will remember what wholeness feels like. This is not about control. It's about coming home. And as Carl Jung taught us, the path within is not easy, but it is the only one that leads to awakening. 9. This journey is individuation, becoming a sovereign soul. This journey is what Carl Jung called individuation, the sacred return to the self, the reclamation of a soul once fractured by people-pleasing, emotional absorption, and the chronic need to be everything for everyone. The empath doesn't wake up by chance. They awaken because the pain of losing themselves becomes louder than the fear of being misunderstood. They begin to realize that their purpose was never to fix others, but to embody their own truth, to become whole, not hollow. Through deep spiritual healing, they no longer wear their sensitivity like a wound, but like a crown, because they see now that feeling deeply is not a curse. It's an initiation into spiritual sight. As Jung once said, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. The empath who turns inward stops shrinking to keep others comfortable and starts honoring the fire inside that refuses to be dimmed. This is where the shift begins, not in the outer world, but in the sacred inner temple, where the empath learns that boundaries are not barriers, they are declarations of worth. They no longer offer their energy as a sacrifice for approval, but instead walk with a quiet strength, guided by clarity rather than chaos. They no longer confuse love with rescuing or silence with peace. Their presence becomes their power, their intuition becomes their compass, and their stillness becomes a mirror that forces others to face themselves. The spiritual empath stops waiting for others to choose them and remembers that their soul was always chosen for something greater, something unseen but deeply felt. They begin to radiate a different frequency, one that doesn't beg to be understood, but commands to be respected. In this space, the empath becomes a portal, not just a feeler of emotion, but a revealer of truth, a breaker of generational patterns, a vessel of sacred presence. Spiritual awakening for the empath is not about escaping the world. It is about mastering the self so completely that the world can no longer master them. To honor your sacred path of individuation, speak it into existence. Comment below, "I am a sovereign soul," to affirm your journey of inner truth, clarity, and sacred presence, and inspire others to walk their own path with power and love. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey of awakening. As Carl Jung taught us, the moment an empath stops seeking external approval and begins seeing with the eyes of truth, everything shifts. The illusions fall away, the masks drop, and the soul finally remembers who it really is. If today's message stirred something deep within you, don't let it fade. Let it grow. Let it transform you. If you found value in this video, please share it with someone who needs this message, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new video that speaks to your soul. Your journey matters. Your truth matters. Stay grounded, stay awakened, and we'll see you in the next one. Carl Jung said that life really begins at 40, my midlife advice to my younger self. Life really does begin at 40. Up until then, you are just doing research. Carl Jung. Have you ever felt like you're running out of time, or that your best years are behind you? What if the truth is the opposite? In today's video on spiritual wisdom, we'll explore Carl Jung's powerful insight that life truly begins at 40, not as an ending, but as a new beginning. This is your invitation to pause, reflect, and ask yourself, what kind of life do I want to create from here? The lessons we share today are not just for those in midlife. They're for anyone who wants to live with purpose, wisdom, and emotional freedom. So tell us in the comments, what would your older self say to you right now? Let's start this journey of awakening together. 1. Time is limited. One day, you wake up inside the life you built. Your younger self always believed there was plenty of time. You thought life was a long road stretched endlessly before you, filled with second chances and future opportunities. You kept putting things off: your healing, your passions, your truth, because you assumed there would always be another tomorrow. But then one day, without warning, you wake up. And it hits you. You're no longer preparing for life. You're already living it. This is the future you used to dream about. And it's nothing like you imagined. What once mattered, chasing success, avoiding failure, pleasing others, starts to lose its grip. The fear of not achieving enough fades, and a deeper question begins to rise. Who are you beneath all of it? Beneath the roles you've played, the masks you've worn, the dreams you were taught to chase. As Carl Jung said, we cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. Because the second half of life demands a different kind of truth. A truth that doesn't come from achievement, but from self-awareness. There comes a point where success no longer satisfies if it costs your peace. Where proving yourself to others begins to feel like a betrayal to your soul. That's the quiet turning point, the invisible shift. Jung spoke of the midlife threshold, where the outer world loses its dominance and the inner world begins to call louder. This isn't a crisis, it's a crossroads. And the voice you've been ignoring, the one that's been whispering to you for years, finally grows too loud to silence. A woman I once knew built a beautiful life from the outside: career, marriage, reputation. But she confessed, just before turning 40, that she felt like a ghost in her own body. I don't know who I am anymore, she said. She had climbed every ladder that society praised, only to find herself disconnected, anxious, and numb. Her life was full, but not fulfilling. And so, slowly, she began to unlearn. She took off the mask of perfection, released the need for control, and started doing the hard work of meeting herself again, and for the first time. That's the real beginning, when we realize we are not here to impress, but to become. When we stop running from our shadows and begin listening to what they've been trying to teach us. Carl Jung believed that true maturity begins when we turn inward, when we stop chasing who we think we should be and start embracing who we already are, beneath all the noise. Individuation, he called it, the sacred process of becoming whole. And through this journey, we begin to value what's real, the softness in our strength, the wisdom in our wounds, the silence in our stillness. Midlife becomes less about performance and more about presence. You no longer seek to conquer the world. You seek to feel at peace within it. You begin to choose differently. You protect your energy. You speak with intention. You love with boundaries. and you finally start living a life that feels like your own. You see time differently now. It's no longer something to waste. It's something to honor. Because one day, you will wake up and realize you are fully inside the life you've been building all along. Have you ever asked yourself, am I truly living the life I want? If yes, tell us what you discovered. If not, comment, I will start today. And let's take this powerful step forward together. 2. Carl Jung, you must face your shadow to become whole. You are more than the version of yourself you show the world. Beneath the surface of your polite smiles, achievements, and responsibilities lives a hidden force that shapes your emotions, decisions, and reactions to your shadow. This shadow is not evil or shameful. It's simply made up of everything you've repressed or disowned over the years. The anger you weren't allowed to express, the fears you buried to appear strong, the parts of you that were labeled unacceptable or too much. And while you might have kept these parts hidden to survive or succeed in your earlier years, they do not disappear. They wait. And midlife is when they return. At 40, something begins to shift. It's not just about age, it's about awareness. You start to feel a strange tension within. The things that once made you feel safe or successful no longer bring satisfaction. The identities you've worn, parent, partner, professional, start to feel like clothes that no longer fit. This is the shadow's invitation. Not to destroy your life, but to deepen it. The spiritual wisdom here is powerful. Midlife isn't a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. When your shadow starts to rise, it's because your soul is ready to integrate what has long been denied. Carl Jung warned that what we do not make conscious will return as fate. Ignoring your shadow doesn't make it go away. It simply turns it outward. You begin to see your own disowned traits in others, judging them for what you've refused to acknowledge in yourself. That's why certain people trigger you so deeply they reflect your unhealed wounds. Until you face them, you'll keep attracting the same painful patterns, situations, and relationships. The shadow will demand your attention, one way or another. But when you choose to confront it, something miraculous happens. You reclaim energy. You unlock gifts that were trapped beneath shame. Your creativity comes back. Your voice grows stronger. You no longer perform for approval. You speak your truth, even when it's messy. And this isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole. The integration of your light and your darkness is what makes you real, grounded, and spiritually awake. This work shadow integration isn't a one-time project. It's a lifelong journey that begins in earnest when you stop running from discomfort and start listening to what your pain is trying to teach you. The freedom you seek doesn't come from fixing yourself, but from embracing every part of yourself. When you do that, you stop being afraid of who you are, and you begin to walk through life with a quiet, authentic power. A presence that's not dependent on praise, success, or control. So as the years pass and life asks deeper questions of you, lean in. Midlife is not the end. It's the return to yourself, to the parts you lost, to the wholeness that was waiting beneath the surface all along. And in that return, you don't just age, you awaken. Comment below, I am ready to face my shadow, if you're committed to becoming whole. Your journey to true self-acceptance begins now. Don't run from what's hidden, embrace it. 3. Abraham Maslow. Success means becoming, not just achieving. You chased after the symbols of success, job titles, promotions, financial milestones, the approval of others. You wore your achievements like armor, thinking they would protect you from doubt. But despite the applause, something inside you remained unsettled. That quiet inner voice kept asking, "Is this all there is?" Abraham Maslow understood this dilemma. His hierarchy of needs teaches us that once our physical and safety needs are met, the next and highest human drive is not accumulation, it's actualization. It's not about having more, but becoming more. Self-actualization isn't glamorous. It doesn't always come with a salary bump or a standing ovation. It's the daily commitment to living meaningfully, to aligning your life with your values, to shedding false layers, to asking difficult questions and refusing easy answers. Many people never reach this level of growth because they remain trapped in what's familiar. They choose comfort over evolution, routine over risk, and validation over authenticity. But spiritual wisdom shows us that the real reward is never in being impressive. It's in being real. There comes a moment when you must shift your entire orientation from proving to becoming. Proving seeks the spotlight. Becoming seeks the truth. Proving is about performance. Becoming is about presence. When you live to prove yourself, your life becomes a constant audition. But when you live to become yourself, your life becomes a sacred journey. And that sacred shift is the beginning of your spiritual awakening. You begin to realize that life isn't asking you to win. It's asking you to grow. You stop chasing success as defined by others and start defining it for yourself. Not by how much you earn, but by how deeply you feel. Not by how many people admire you, but by how true you are to your soul. You start paying attention to what brings peace, not just praise. And you begin to understand that becoming your truest self is not a luxury, it is your calling. Maslow's insight isn't just psychological, it's spiritual. He was pointing us toward the same truth that mystics, sages, and awakened thinkers have always known. You are here not merely to survive or succeed, but to awaken. An awakening begins when you stop living on autopilot. It begins when you get quiet enough to hear your soul whisper, "There's more." Not more to buy. This is the power of midlife. It strips away illusion. It reveals the emptiness of success without self. It calls you inward, not to escape the world, but to return to it more whole, more human, more alive. And that is when the real journey begins, not when you've proven enough, but when you've surrendered enough to finally become. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Are you ready to stop proving and start becoming? Let's continue this journey of self-actualization together. 4. Viktor Frankl. Happiness comes from meaning, not achievement. Many people spend their lives chasing happiness as if it's a finish line, believing that achievement, status, or material comfort will finally bring them peace. But Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and the father of logotherapy, offered a radically different perspective. He discovered that happiness is not something you pursue directly. It's a side effect of living a meaningful life. His profound insight, born out of unimaginable suffering, still speaks to us today. Those who have a reason to live can endure almost anything. This message echoes the spiritual wisdom found in Carl Jung's belief that life truly begins at 40, when the soul stops conforming and starts searching for truth. Frankl identified 3 main paths to meaning: work, love, and suffering. But these are not the surface-level definitions we've been conditioned to accept. Meaningful work isn't just about climbing the ladder or earning praise. It's about contributing beyond yourself. It's the quiet kind of purpose that no one else may even see, but that your soul recognizes. It might be creating art that uplifts others, mentoring someone through a hard season, or even showing up every day with compassion and honesty. Jung would call this the integration of the self, where your inner calling matches your outer action, and your ego surrenders to your essence. Then comes love, which Frankl believed was the only way to fully understand another human being. Not the filtered, curated kind of connection we see on social media, but real, soul-to-soul love, the kind that reveals who you truly are. It's in the mirror of that kind of love that we confront both our light and our shadow. Jung taught that becoming whole means embracing our shadow, not hiding from it. And often, it's the people we love most who help us do that. Through them, we don't just receive comfort, we also face our unresolved wounds, which is part of the sacred journey toward healing. And then there is suffering. The word alone might make you want to turn away. But Frankl teaches us that suffering is not meaningless if we choose to give it meaning. Pain becomes sacred when we transform it into purpose. This mirrors Jung's view that suffering reveals the unconscious, pushing us towards self-awareness. Instead of numbing the pain or pretending it doesn't exist, ask yourself what it's teaching you. What strength is it forging? What wisdom is it carving into your character? The pain that once broke you may one day become the very light that guides others. So the real questions are not, how successful are you? How admired are you? But rather, what are you creating that will outlive your fear? Who are you loving with your full presence and heart? And what wounds are you turning into a well of strength for yourself and those around you? When you answer those questions with honesty and courage, you're no longer chasing happiness. You're living in meaning, and that's where happiness quietly follows. If you're ready to seek meaning over mere achievement, comment below, I choose purpose. Let this be your first step toward lasting happiness. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next message of transformation. 5. Søren Kierkegaard. Fear is the threshold to freedom. You overthink. You wait for the perfect moment, as if certainty will one day come knocking at your door with permission to begin. You cling to safety, mistaking comfort for peace. But deep down, you know this. The longer you wait, the heavier the silence becomes. Søren Kierkegaard called it the dizziness of freedom, that unsettling vertigo we feel when standing at the edge of possibility. It's not danger that makes you tremble. It's the realization that you are finally free to choose. This fear is not a flaw. It's a threshold. When your life starts to shift, especially around midlife, it's not a breakdown. It's a breakthrough. Carl Jung said, life truly begins at 40, because that's when the mask begins to crack, and your soul demands something deeper, something real. The routines that once made you feel safe now feel like cages. The identities you clung to for validation no longer fit. And in their place, uncertainty, possibility, freedom. Yet the mind resists. It demands guarantees before it acts. You start believing you're not ready, not qualified, not brave enough. But spiritual wisdom reveals a deeper truth. You will never feel ready. Readiness is not a feeling. It's a decision. It's the moment you stop letting fear dictate the shape of your life. The leap of faith Kierkegaard speaks of is not blind recklessness. It's the sacred act of choosing courage over certainty. That very fear you're feeling, it's not a warning. It's a signal. It's your soul expanding beyond the limitations your past has imposed. Fear often shows up when we're on the verge of transformation. It doesn't mean turn back. It means step forward. The discomfort you feel is not the enemy. It's the invitation. If you wait for the fear to go away before you act, you may spend your life waiting. Spiritual awakening doesn't arrive with fireworks. It often arrives quietly in the decision to speak your truth, to try the unknown, to walk away from what no longer serves your growth. It's born the moment you say, "I'm afraid, but I'm doing it anyway." It's not about becoming fearless. It's about making fear irrelevant to your commitment. The leap doesn't promise safety, but it offers liberation. The path won't be predictable, but it will be alive. And that's what the soul wants: not control, but connection. Not security, but wholeness. The fear you feel right now, it's not trying to paralyze you. It's trying to prepare you. So don't wait for everything to make sense. Don't wait until the voice of fear disappears. Start now. Start small. Start scared. But start. Because the freedom you seek is waiting not on the other side of fear, but through it. If this message stirred something within you, don't wait for the perfect moment. Subscribe now for more spiritual wisdom that helps you turn fear into freedom and faith into your next bold step forward. 6. Carl Rogers. The good life begins when you stop pretending. You've spent years wearing a mask, smiling when you were sad, agreeing when your soul whispered no, following the crowd to feel safe. But the longer you pretend, the further you drift from who you truly are. This is not just emotional discomfort. It's the beginning of a spiritual awakening. Carl Rogers called it congruence, the sacred alignment between your inner truth and your outer life. When your actions reflect your essence, you don't just feel better, you become whole. The mask may have helped you survive. It may have earned you praise, approval, even success. But it also silenced your joy, numbed your intuition, and buried your aliveness. Pretending is a subtle kind of self-betrayal. Each time you dim your light to keep others comfortable, you send a message to your soul. You are not safe here. And yet, true freedom begins the moment you stop filtering your truth. To live in congruence, you must begin to speak honestly, not with cruelty, but with clarity. Let your words reflect your heart, not your fear. Say what you mean. Own what you feel. Honor your needs without apology. This kind of authenticity isn't about being bold or loud, it's about being real. And when you live in truth, your presence becomes magnetic because others feel permission to be real too. Follow what excites you. Excitement is not a luxury, it is your compass. The things that light you up are not random. They are spiritual breadcrumbs leading you home. So many people abandon their curiosity in midlife, believing it's too late to change. But the truth is, midlife is when your soul begins to speak louder than your ego. It's when the roles you've played begin to crack, not because you're failing, but because you're awakening. Radical self-acceptance is the next step. Not the sanitized version of self-love that glosses over pain, but the gritty kind that says, even in my confusion, I am worthy. Even with my flaws, I am whole. When you stop resisting your imperfections, they lose their power to define you. You become less performative, more present, less polished, more powerful. Acceptance is not resignation. It's the foundation of transformation. This is the quiet revolution of midlife. You stop chasing who you're supposed to be and start returning to who you've always been. You stop editing yourself to be lovable and realize that love was never meant to be earned. It was meant to be remembered. The more you embrace your truth, the more your life begins to flow with grace, not force. Because the good life, as Roger said, is not a final destination, it's a direction. And that direction always leads inward. If you're still here with us, comment below. I choose authenticity. Your voice matters, and your journey to living the good life begins now. Let's grow together. 7. Alfred Adler. Rewrite the story of your past. You are not defined by your past mistakes, and your pain does not have the final word on your identity. The events in your life, no matter how painful or complex, do not determine your worth. What truly defines you is the meaning you attach to those experiences. Alfred Adler believed that we are not passive products of our histories. We are active authors of our stories. And this belief opens the door to freedom. The past is not a place to live in. It's a reference, not a residence. This shift in mindset may seem simple, but it is powerful. Many people carry their past like a weight, believing it shapes their destiny. But in truth, your past only has the meaning you give it. If you choose to see it through the lens of growth and resilience, it transforms from a chain into a stepping stone. To change your narrative, you must start by confronting your limiting beliefs. These internal scripts, I'm not enough, I always fail, no one will understand me, are not facts. They are inherited echoes from childhood, culture, or trauma. And unless you challenge them, they will continue to shape your behavior unconsciously. The moment you start questioning those beliefs is the moment you begin reclaiming your story. Look closely, and you will find proof of your strength in places you once saw only weakness. Think of the times you were hurting and still kept going. The times you had every reason to give up, but chose to rise instead. These are not just memories. They are evidence of your resilience. Collect them like sacred fragments of your truth. They are reminders that you have always carried more strength than you realized. And then begin to act as if the new story is already true. Walk with the posture of someone who knows they have value. Speak with the tone of someone who has forgiven themselves. Make decisions as someone who believes they are worthy of peace, love, and growth. This isn't pretending, it's reclaiming. When you behave from your future self, your mind begins to shift. Behavior teaches the brain what to believe. Take the example of a man who lived for years in the shadow of childhood rejection. Every relationship was haunted by the fear of abandonment. But in his 40s, after discovering the work of Carl Jung and Adler, he realized he had the power to stop living the same emotional loop. He challenged the narrative that he was unlovable. He began to write a new one, not with dramatic changes, but with consistent small acts of self-respect. And that shifted everything. He didn't change the past, but he changed the meaning of it, and that changed his future. Carl Jung said, "Life really begins at 40. Up until then, you are just doing research." In that spirit, midlife is not a crisis. It's a second birth. It is a chance to return to the self you were always meant to become. Rewriting your past isn't about denying what happened. It's about transforming its power. Because healing isn't erasing the story. It's choosing a better way to tell it. If this message has stirred something within you, leave a comment of intention. I choose to rewrite my story. Your words may be the first step toward healing, and they might just inspire someone else to do the same. So if you're approaching 40 or already know this, your journey is far from over. In fact, according to Carl Jung, it's just beginning. This is the time to embrace your truth, heal your past, and step fully into the life that was meant for you. If this message has resonated with your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom for more insights that nourish your soul. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment of clarity, growth, and awakening. Your best chapter may be just beginning. Stay wise, stay true, and I'll see you in the next video.